those things get done automatically. And I'm not saying just like pseudo automatically, I mean literally automatically. Productivity should go up very significantly. So we're seeing more automation and more augmentation. Now, what this represents for a translator or a translation agency owner or an enterprise buyers are really the ability to do a lot more with a lot less. There's a huge opportunity to touch on much more content, much more languages, which means much more volume, which means much more business. I do believe that the overall outcome is a lot more net positive than negative.
It's 2025. I have with me the CEO of BureauWorks. Thank you for being here, and we will dive into the future of localization in 2025.
Thank you, Jan. Very nice to be here with you.
BureauWorks is a platform, it's a translation and business management system. What do you feel for you is the most important thing that will change our world in 2025?
BureauWorks is a translation management system with a lot of bells and whistles in the business management side as well. I think the main thing that we focus on is enabling both translators, agencies, and enterprise users to manage small, medium, or large scale programs in a very in a very automatic way and with a lot of augmentation. So we focus a lot on the automation and the augmentation. And one allows you to save a lot of time. So for instance, if you have real automation, you don't have to have necessarily a project manager running a quote or placing a task. Mm-hmm. And then the augmentation bit is how much people can really benefit in practice from all of these amazing advancements in generative AI. But as far as where we see it, we're seeing more automation and more augmentation.
When we talk about, technology change, is it a linear curve we're in, or is it like a hockey stick curve in terms of innovation that is coming this year?
I have no idea as a whole. I think I do have some idea of how we behave as an industry. So if we think about, for instance, the last 40 years as far as technological adoption, and we look at the implementation of CAT tools and then machine translation, the technology outside of our industry has been accelerating and been adopted a lot faster than our industry. So our industry is an industry that is very good at resisting technological change in general. I always like comparing our industry to digital marketing because digital marketing is also related to communication, but it's very much tech dominated and run through it became a technological thing from beginning to end. So if you take a look at the number of email marketing tools that you can find out there, and the number of content management systems that you can find out there, and the number of CRM systems that you can find out there, and just the sheer number of tools in the digital marketing space is just completely overwhelming. So we're talking about thousands and thousands of tools and companies. And obviously, yes, it's a much bigger industry for sure, but it's also the way, the dynamic of that industry. And if you take a look at our space, for instance, you don't have that many translation management systems to choose from. It's a relatively small space, maybe 6, maybe 7 translation management systems that you can choose from. And as far as adoption goes, you still have a very large number of translators who don't even use machine translation. There's still a lot of resistance towards machine translation. I'm not even talking about machine translation with generative AI or augmentation. We're just talking about machine translation. There's a lot of resistance around machine translation. And the way our industry has kind of developed is you have some companies that are large enough to have, for instance, their own machine translation divisions, and they know what kinds of content they're going to machine translate and what they're not, and they have their processes and things like that. For the most part, companies are relatively conservative as far as their decision-making of when to run something through machine translation, when to run things through a human. And that's been kind of so far the status quo. And my presumption is that is already changing, and it's been changing over the past 20 years. So it's not something new, but as it continues to get better, the change will continue to accentuate. So as far as what the curve looks like, in our space, I still see kind of like a much more consistent slope rather than the hockey stick or something kind of crazy. If you think about all companies in the world, most companies do not translate. The companies that do translate, they don't translate into all of the languages that they could be translating into, and they definitely don't translate all of the content they can be translating into. So we're seeing a small percentage of languages and content actually being touched by translation these days. My opinion there is that there's a huge opportunity to touch on much more content, much more languages, which means much more volume, which means much more business. So there's a lot of untapped potential. So that's the upside. The downside is, for a long time, rates were relatively stable, even through the introduction of machine translation. And as machine translation got better, sure, some agencies were able to negotiate maybe machine translation post-editing and negotiate more competitive rates with freelancers because they had already pre-processed something for machine translation. But there wasn't no real clear methodology around it. It was kind of like, yeah, sure, whatever. I'll charge 20, 30% less because this is taking me a little bit less work. But it wasn't such a big thing, right? Now we're reaching a point where we're seeing edit distances in many languages go beneath 5%. So that's an important threshold. The 5% threshold is an important threshold because when you're changing less than 5% of the text, it becomes really hard to explain to someone why that 5% is important. I mean, I know why that 5% is important. 5% in a sentence could be the difference between understanding everything or understanding nothing, right? It could be, it could change completely in meaning. In language, single comma, single word. So 5% is still important, but because we're changing so little, the activity becomes a lot more reading and, tweaking things rather than, translation, editing, proofreading, this big thing that people invented. Naturally, productivity should go up very significantly. So we see already translators being able to, depending on their subject matter and language pair, translate consistently 12,000, 14,000 words a day, which was unthinkable a few years ago, right? And as far with high quality, and that creates a bunch of questions. Well, what's going to happen to pricing because of that? Right? The world isn't just a golden road where now that same translator is going to make 3 times more and everybody's going to be okay with that.
That's not the reality.
That's not the reality, right? There's a demand for that savings to be passed up the value chain so that the company who's hiring the buyer, they want to share some of that benefit as well. And I think that's the tension, right? The tension is, okay, so there's all this novelty, there's all this amazing stuff that is possible, that is being unlocked through technology. There are a lot of questions over how to adopt it. And there are even more questions over how to charge for it and how to pay for it. So I think that's where we are in 2025. I think we're beginning to see more companies adopting a more aggressive stance towards these kinds of services, but at the same time with very little clarity over how to proceed. And a lot of fear, doubt, and uncertainty from all sides, right? And our space is particularly change averse, in my opinion. So you get a lot of pushback and a lot of anger from translators if you begin to meddle with their livelihood, which is understandable.
You have your hands on AI, you have the hands on development of a tool that pushes all these efficiency benefits. So how can people get involved and take part?
I think that's a very important question. And my opinion is with translators, right? The way I've described it previously is there's a lot of value for translators who are either very specialized in something. And for instance, so maybe this is a patent legal claim that went from English into Japanese, and they need someone in Tokyo who is going to have the exact level of expertise to be able to look at the document. And again, even though they may make few changes, they know that they're having the experts look, and that has a lot of value. The other thing that has a lot of value is being able to understand linguistic and cultural nuances and implement them so that you increase the impact of the text. So for instance, it's more like copywriting, right? So where you're looking at a text, and And I say copywriting, but it's not limited to marketing text. It's any kind of text has a goal, right? The goal maybe is the goal is to convince you, maybe the goal is to get you to sign, maybe the goal is to engage you, maybe the goal is to enrage you. I mean, it depends on what it is, right? Maybe it's a social media post designed to enrage people. It's part of it. But a good copywriter is going to be able to, regardless of the text, they're going to be able to look at it and say, okay, this is what the text is doing in language A to achieve that. This is what I'm going to do in language B to achieve the same thing. So this copywriting excellence, it also has a lot of value. So in my opinion, you're either a very good copywriter or you're an expert in something. And I think a big challenge for a lot of translators is that to make ends meet, a lot of translators ended up being something a little bit of these things in between. So maybe they are a little bit of an expert in a given subject matter, but they also have to dabble with 3 or 4 or 5 other subject matters. Maybe they are kind of good with copywriting, but they also have to do
medical translations or legal or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or a lot of volume of work that doesn't allow them that depth of textual analysis to do that. And that's more conceptual, right? So understanding that as far as an identity goes, you're either identifying more as a copywriter or more as a subject matter expert. That's important. The second part that's important is as far as is getting your hands as dirty as possible with technology that allows you to take your productivity to the next level, because that empowers you, right? So let's say you were doing 3,000-4,000 words a day, and now you're doing 10,000-12,000 words a day. Power to you. Now, maybe that means you're just going to be making twice as much money, or maybe you're going to be working half as much. Power to you, right? At least you're taking back the control, right? You're not thinking from a theoretical or dogmatic perspective that machine translation is bad or that technology is bad. You're just saying, okay, these are the tools available. This is the most that I can do. Now, if you take that step, then a lot of options begin to present to you as a translator, where you can decide and you can say, I'm making twice as much, but I know that maybe this is not going to be sustainable. So I'm going to begin offering my clients discounts. And maybe I'm hoping that these discounts are actually going to result in more work for me. And because I'm going to become more competitive. And that could unlock a very positive cycle, right? But it's a hard decision to make.
Right.
But I think that if you just think about a hypothetical scenario, right? If you're able to crank up your productivity by 2x, so you're doubling your productivity, and you're offering your clients a 30% discount, you're still netting positive, right? So let's say you went from doing, just as an example, hypothetically, 4,000 words a day at 10 cents a day, which meant you were making $400 a day. Now you're making 8,000 words a day, which would mean $800, but you're giving them, let's say, a 30% discount, which means 800 minus 240. You're still making $560 a day, which is a whole lot more than 400. You're working the same, right? But you're opening the road to get even more volume and maybe applying further discounts and so on. So, but that's a hard thing for people to digest, most because that requires kind of like an entrepreneurial mindset and not kind of a service mindset.
Like
the service
like
mindset,
business acumen. What they should sort of specialization you mentioned and business acumen might be two of the things to learn in 2025, definitely, right?
For sure. And I think getting rid of theory is very important, because I think one of the things that most holds us back is this attachment to the past, and I get it. Maybe you studied 30 years to develop your trade, your translation craft, and your tools and your processes, your specialties, and then all of a sudden there's all this technology that completely changes that and requires you to reinvent yourself. A lot of people don't want to do that, and I get it. I get the resistance, but ultimately I think that works really against you. I think that if you're willing to surf whatever is in that current wave, I think you stand to benefit a lot from that flexibility, from that agility, etc. And I think, in my opinion, like when you take the same, let's say, a conundrum and you apply it to translation agencies, I think it's a very similar conundrum. Sure, it's at scale because now you have more languages, more specialties, more different kinds of services, but it's still the same thing. Translation agencies that apply this methodology should and will be able to produce a lot more. Now the question is, do they pocket that productivity or do they relay that back into their clients? If they do that, Do they stand to win more or less? And I think people stay in this standstill where they're like, A, they're very hesitant about implementing. B, they're hesitant about what to do with that because like, should I just go ahead and tell my client that they shouldn't pay me any more $1,000 for this task and pay me $700? Is this really a smart move for me? Because isn't that taking a step back? And maybe it is, but in my opinion, the only way forward, ultimately, like, so if you put this in the 5-year perspective, the only way forward is that the per word cost will have to go down a lot, like crazily. At the same time, income levels have to go up. So translators, agencies, they have to make more. That's just the nature of economy, right? Everything becomes more expensive. People have to make more. Productivity will make the unit cost. So the unit cost will be driven down, but people will have to ultimately make more. And that's what technology is there for, right? Driving down the unit cost, but allowing people to make more. So ultimately, in a scenario where you're like, okay, hypothetically, right? Maybe an agency is charging an average of 20 cents a word. Now this agency is operating at 5 cents a word, but they're making 6 times as much volume. They're making just as much margin, and ultimately they're making more money. And
I think this is something we are seeing as well. Just in terms of the volume that's processed in the platforms, volume is growing, and at the end, it's new content that wasn't translated before. Now it gets translated because it's easier, the quality is right, and we're still in business, right? So you have to do some post editing, and this is super important. Gabriel, what would you recommend buyer side? So what's coming up for the buyer side in 2025?
I think it's the same. That's the thing. It's the same. Ultimately, buyers, I think, are also very hesitant to make moves to change things because the buyers are also in a fragile position. A localization buyer or manager, their main goal typically is to avoid problems, right? They're not there. They're not the driver of the show, part of the team that makes sure that the company show can go on without any major issues and problems and complaints and all of that. So the approach is typically conservative, right? And to change things is to open yourself up to the possibility of risk. And maybe you built a 10-year-long relationship with your main provider, and you don't feel it's right to just tell them that now I'm going to pay you 30% less or 20% less or whatever, or force them into a new methodology. But sometimes someone has to take that first step, because ultimately, in my opinion, if you're the buyer as well and you're not changing, at some point, someone in management is going to look at this and it's like, this is ridiculous. Like, we have all this technology, spend is still the same, languages didn't increase, time to market didn't decrease. What's going on here? And for a long time, I think that a localization manager, a good one, could come up with very interesting and colorful decks and explain to management, look, this is a complicated problem, and don't mess with it because it can only get worse. It could be a lot worse. And people would buy that. But I think management is going to stop and is stopping to buy that already. So again, I think the common theme, in my opinion, between buyer, translator, agency is really trying to get out of the pattern of avoidance and denial and refusal and getting into, okay, what can I do with this for real? What can be done? And I think to do that, you need to reconsider the technology that you're using for sure, because a lot of the technology that people are using isn't natively built to leverage that. So then they start thinking about all these crazy ways in which they can leverage this technology. Oh, I'm just going to use GPT to pre-translate all my stuff. And it's like, okay, and what's going on with your tagging, and what's going on with your translation memories, and what's going on with this? They introduce improvisations, and improvisations, in my opinion, they weaken the process incredibly. So if you're not working with a tool or with tools that natively take advantage of all of this technology, it becomes really hard. And I think that's where most people are. I think most people are at a standstill. It's like, I learned this tool, I invested money in this tool, I built a relationship with this tool, I built a relationship with this provider, and everybody's kind of like in some way, it's a gridlock. Nobody can move because moving requires some sense of loss. initially, and nobody's willing to put up that sense of loss. Just as an example, you're a translator and maybe you spent between purchases and upgrades $3,000 in your translation software over the past 10 years. And you also spent in training another $5,000. So you're like 10K sunk into that. And now you like it and you got used to it. That also has a huge cost. And now your clients expect you to work with that. That also has a huge cost. So you don't feel you can change. You're kind of like locked into that.
Opportunity cost. Building up.
Exactly. And at some point, if you're not willing to give up that cost and say, okay, to hell with it. Yes, I did all of that, but that's in the past. That's a sunk cost. I'm going to focus on what's ahead of me. And what's ahead of me is opportunity. I'm going to focus on opportunity. And then I think things start to unravel differently. The challenge is it requires an immensely risk-prone entrepreneurial mindset to do those kinds of changes. Most people, realistically, they're going to wait out this gridlock until where they see that there's no way forward. And then they're going to be, okay, I have to use this other tool. Fine.
Don't wait. So basically, don't wait. Accept that what you have invested in the past was good for the past. But maybe now is the right moment to look up ahead and evaluate what is really brings you forward. This is maybe the summary of this attitude.
The third message is, yes, get out of waiting and get into doing and using things on your own so that you can reach your own conclusions, right? Don't accept someone's post or paper or blog that says that, machine translation plus Gen AI is garbage or is this or is that or is great. Reach your own conclusions. See what you can do. I think that's the most important thing, because then people begin working from a point of view of actual information and not of hearsay.
But in this journey for 2025, you as a CEO of one of these technology drivers in our industry, what excites you most?
We're working on lots of things that really excite me. Ultimately, honestly, and I think that the biggest thing that excites me is increasing the adoption curve. It's already been amazing for us. We grew 400% last year in terms of our software sales. So we did amazing. That represents a lot more adoption, but we want to see even more of that. We want to continue to take really bold decisions as far as what the product does and what we can allow people to do with the product. But what excites me is what people can do with it, because still at the stage where we're at right now, we have so much more technology than people actually take advantage of. When you think about it when I think about it from sales perspective, and I'm talking to a translation agency, for instance, and I ask them, how do they do things? And I look under the hood and I see a project manager taking maybe 5 to 10 minutes to prepare a quote for a customer and downloading the PDF, uploading the PDF into an email, and then getting the client sign off over another email, and then moving the project manually from pending to approved, and then looking for the translators that are available and sending out a mass email to the translators that they believe are available, waiting for the translators to reply, sending a localization kit over email. When I see this stuff going on and I'm like, it's 2025 and I know what could be done. I know that quote could be done in literally 1 to 2 seconds automatically by BureauWorks. I know that the job placement could be done automatically in 0 seconds by BureauWorks. And I know that all of that overhead could be gone and that the translators could be working at twice the speed. I'm like, well, why aren't people doing more of that? And it just amazes me how much hesitation there is. And I don't know if it's a mixture of things. I think that there's a little bit of conformity and risk aversion. And I also think that there's a little bit of disbelief and that it's almost kind of too good to be true.
Yeah.
And if you ask me, what would really make my year is seeing more people change in that way and seeing the industry kind of embrace this new epoch of what is the definition of automation and what is the definition of augmentation, because that's, in my opinion, the way that the industry survives. But the way the industry survives is not by continuing to say machine translation is bad, Gen AI is bad, we're the humans, we know. That battle is lost, in my opinion. It's completely lost. An option is look, Machine translation and Gen AI are great, but human are greater, and you can have these humans for maybe 5 cents a word. That's a battle that has, in my opinion, a lot of validity because, and I'm just saying 5 cents could be 10 cents, could be 15 cents. I don't, it's just a number, but for a number that makes sense for the buyer, where they're like, yeah, of course I want Gabriel or Jan to see this because it's already okay. But if they see it, it's going to be great. And it's only going to cost me $50. Of course I want it to be great, right? If that's the mindset that people are taking, I only see growth for our space because, like I said, there's so much more content that needs to be translated that doesn't. Every market for every company is an opportunity for global expansion. One of the reasons why companies think so much before expanding is that it's such an expensive endeavor. If the translation component becomes so much less expensive, then I think we begin to unlock a very positive cycle for our space. So that's what I would like to see. For me, that's the realization.
Excellent. Yeah, this has already responded my last question. Basically, is the one thing you would change from what you told us, from me, is changing mindset. I think that is the one thing in 2025 that can make or break many of the businesses and personal developments that are taking shape in our industry. So embracing, let's try and let's see what's out there mentality will be important to have a very successful 2025.
Yeah, I would just qualify that the let's try is a lot harder than it seems. It's let's try isn't opening ChatGPT and saying prompt ChatGPT, hey, please translate this for me, or playing around with prompting. That's not what I mean by let's try. Let's try means, okay, this is what I've done in, let's say, tool A. Let me take tool B, give it a spin for a month. Let me see what's possible. I know that at first I'm going to be less productive. I know that at first I'm going to miss a bunch of things that I'm used to, but let me give it at least 3-4 weeks to see what I can do with it. And then be okay. Now I can make a decision, right? So it's not just trying isn't opening another software once. Trying isn't just, reading an article about something. Trying means like really putting in your best effort for a reasonable amount of time to see what can be done with that approach. And that's hard, right? That's really hard because that, if you're used to, just as an example, let's say you're used to doing 6,000 words a day, or your agency's used to ABC, to implement anything requires sometimes taking a half a step back, or 1 step back, or even 2 steps back to then take 3-4 steps forward. And that initial sense of loss is really hard to cope with. And I think that's the most important part.
I think this is a great moment also to mention that we have partnered for a training course around bureau work, actually to facilitate this access in a practical way, to just try the software out, to play around with it, but in a learning group, to see all these features with a trainer on your hand. I'm very excited about that because it represents also my feeling that you have to have opportunity to try things out, but as you said, not be let alone on this journey, but to have a partner, to have a group, to have an environment where you can do this training or this learning experience in a structured way. So from this side, I'm super excited to have this partnership with you guys from between Beluga and Bureau Works, and to see how the learners from our course will embrace the technology and how they can automate as much as possible to get this efficiency gains you were mentioned in our talk today.
Now, likewise, and we're super grateful for the partnership as well. But I agree that there's a fundamental aspect that you're talking about, which is the peer support and the guidance. I think that, for me, often on my own to try something that I've never tried, to do something that I've never done, can be very daunting and intimidating. But if you're working with peers who are going through the same things that you're going, and if you're being guided by a coach who's done that path before, that really makes things so much easier. And that's why I see so much value, because yes, we do offer, in my opinion, it's a pretty good software, but having the software and feeling comfortable around using it, those are two different things. And I know you and your team do a great job as far as not just making people feeling comfortable, but also people feeling like they can count on each other, they can rely on each other. And that support network, in my opinion, has so much value in times like today.
So this is also the aim of this podcast, of this video cast, opening the door to our technology partners and the technology world in the language industry. And today with us, we had Gabriel Fairman, the CEO of BureauWorks, one of these tools that are shaping the future of the industry. Thanks a lot, Gabriel, for being here with me today on the show. I hope people will embrace your recommendations around the world and just try it, but try it in a structured way and get your efficiency up.
Thank you, Jan. It's been a pleasure. If anything, I hope people don't embrace my recommendations, that they follow their own. That's the most important part of my message. Follow your path, figure it out, but try.
Exactly.
But I'm very grateful, Jan, for your time. And again, I'm a big fan of your work, everything that you do for our industry. I think you bring so much enthusiasm and excitement, and I feel very blessed to be here with you. So thank you.
Thanks a lot. And in the comments below, leave us your ideas. What's your experience? Okay. We are looking forward to it, and see you soon, Gabriel, and all the best for 2025.
All right. Thank you, Jan. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.